All right, well, thank you all for joining us today for what I know is going to be a really interesting presentation on the life and times of Wallie V. Funk. As most of you know, Wallie has enjoyed a prolific career in journalism that spanned more than 4 decades. He's been a co-owner, manager, editor, and publisher of 3 independent newspapers. Those are the Anacortes American, the Whidbey News-Times, and the South Whidbey Record. And I know you're in for a great presentation today. I know there's going to be a number of really humorous anecdotes about Wallie's career and about the work that he's done in photojournalism. I know I'm looking forward to it. I've been privy to some of these stories thus far. I'm Elizabeth Joffrion. I'm the Director of Heritage Resources here at Western Libraries, and in that role I have the honor and privilege of providing stewardship over the library's archives, manuscripts, and special collections, rare book collections. For those of you who haven't visited us before, Heritage Resources actually consists of 3 departments within the library. It's the Center for Pacific Northwest Studies, which is where Wallie Funk's archives are housed, as well as the University Archives and the special collections. University Archives in the center are down on the south side of campus, and Special Collections is located right where we are right now. I'd like to extend a special and warm welcome to Wallie. It was a journey to get up here, and I can't tell you how honored we are to have you here today. It's a real pleasure to have you present for this, as well as his family, Carl, and others who I think will be joining us, and his friends. I know he's got a number in the audience. And to our esteemed panel, who I'll introduce in just a moment. My relationship with Wallie goes way back to 2000. I'm sure not as far back as many of you in the room today. We met really through Theresa Trebon here on the panel, who introduced us to Wallie and introduced us to his amazing body of personal papers and photographs, and helped negotiate the transfer, at least a portion of his collection, to Western. And with that responsibility, we preserve and provide access to future researchers and others. And I can say Wallie's collection gets a great deal of interest. It's a real honor to have it here. I also wanted to mention that there are 2 other institutions, at least 2, that hold significant bodies of archives related to Wallie's career. Those are the Anacortes Museum and the Island County Museum down in Coupeville. And finally, you may have noticed on your way in that my staff and I have curated an exhibit of some of Wallie's favorite photographs, some of our favorite photographs. If you got here later and didn't have a chance to look at those images, please do. We'd love to hear your stories, any feedback you have, any memories you have about the photographs. There's some tea and other beverages, pastries and cookies out there. Please do avail yourself of those after the panel discussion. And I would ask, if you don't mind, after this is over, if we could repair into the exhibition area. We've got a class coming in early in the morning, and I know my staff is going to want to set up for that. So if everybody could convene, stay as long as you want, but maybe out there in the exhibition area. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our esteemed panel. And I'll start off with Elaine Walker, who joined us a little bit later. We're so pleased to have her with us. And let me just tell you a little bit about Elaine. Elaine graduated from the University of Nevada, Reno with a degree in journalism in 1988. She worked for several years as a contributing writer and photographer for the Fernley Leader Dayton Courier in Nevada. Upon moving to the Pacific Northwest, she worked for the Anacortes American from 1996 to 2011. At the American, she started as a stringer, that's a good newspaper term, right? And worked her way up to reporter, photographer, and finally news editor. Over the years, she's interviewed hundreds of local newsmakers and historical figures and received more than 40 awards from the Washington Newspapers Association for her news, feature writings, and photographs. Since leaving the American, she joined the Anacortes Museum, where she's now curator of collections. Elaine also edited the book, Pictures of the Past, by Wallie V. Funk, celebrating 125 years of Anacortes history. She's the mother of 4 and a grandmother of 5, as she says so far. 6. You were right about the so far. And lives on North Whidbey Island with her husband, Jim. And we have copies of her book here and available for sale in the back. Just talk to Elaine, so check it out. Next, we have Scott Terrell. Scott is a graduate of the Visual Communications program at Western Washington University, where he completed his degree in 1981. His first position was part-time news photographer at the Federal Way News, where he learned photojournalism on the job. He later moved to a full-time position with the Highline Times, a Seattle area paper that publishes twice weekly. In 1985, Scott joined the Skagit Valley Herald, and in the early 1990s, he was promoted to the head photo position, where he oversaw the change from film to digital. Throughout his years at the Herald, Scott has covered everything from human tragedies and courtroom drama to state championships and 100-year birthday celebrations. He's an adjunct professor here at Western's journalism department, where he conveys to, and I quote, or perhaps paraphrase Scott here, he conveys to photojournalism students what he's absorbed over the years while carrying cameras and lenses from assignment to assignment. Theresa Trebon is the records manager and archivist for the Swinomish Indian Tribal Community. Her contributions to the tribe include the initiation of the Swinomish Records and Tribal Archives Department and the installation of its first permanent history exhibit entitled Swinomish Journeys. Through the Anacortes Museum Foundation, she provided, as I mentioned before, invaluable assistance in the initial organization and donation of the Wallie V archives, now held by the Center for Pacific Northwest Studies, the Anacortes Museum, and the Island County Museum. In her career, she started several organizations devoted to the preservation of cultural heritage, including the Historic Looms of America and her consulting business, Continuum History and Research. She served as a speaker for the Washington Humanities Commission, now Humanities Washington, in their Inquiring Mind lecture series, and is the author of numerous books and articles, including First Views, an Early History of Skagit County, which she wrote in Wallie's honor. Don't have any for sale here, but we can.
I think the only place you can get those is the Anacortes Museum.
Yeah, okay. And then finally, our moderator for today's panel session is Paul Cocke. Paul's a veteran journalist and experienced communications professional. A graduate of the University of North Carolina at Charlotte with a bachelor's degree in history and political science, Paul studied in the master's program in journalism at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. He's worked as a sports copy editor with the daily Durham Morning Herald in North Carolina, and as a reporter, copy editor, and assistant state editor with the daily Greenville News in South Carolina. He's lost his accent, by the way, you'll see. He also edited several weekly newspapers in South Carolina, including the Pickens Centennial, the Easley Progress, and the Liberty Monitor. From 1993 until 2001, he was vocational manager and then vice president division manager for Habco, Inc. in Mount Vernon. He was then news editor for the Anacortes American before being hired in 2003 as the media coordinator for the Office of Communications here at Western. He's been the director of the office, now called Communications and Marketing, since 2007. Paul has won numerous journalism awards, including Reporting in Depth, Environmental Reporting, Breaking News, and Feature Writing. He's edited several books, including Cruising to Alaska, which was authored by Bob Duke. He and his wife, Diane, have raised 5 children and now have 2 grandchildren. So we have a lot of interesting perspectives here, I think not just about Wallie and his career and his photographs, but also I think the changes in journalism and independent reporting over the last few decades. So it's a real honor to... Yeah, king for a day. So it's an honor to have you all here. I think what we'll do is start out with some brief comments from each of our panelists, and then Paul is going to moderate a panel discussion, and then we'll open it up to all of you for question and answer. So be thinking about some things you'd like to ask Wallie or the panel. And again, thank you all for being here. I appreciate it.
I'm a writer, so I wrote stuff. I hope that's okay. I first met Wallie when I went to work as news editor at the Anacortes American newspaper about 15 years ago. And one of my colleagues there, the late Nancy Walbeck, a brilliant woman and a fantastic arts writer, once told me that one of the fringe benefits of working at the Anacortes American was that you got to see Wallie on a regular basis. How bright Nancy was. While working at the American with Nancy, Jack Darton, and Elaine, it was always great to see Wallie coming into the newspaper, always cheerful, always interested in what was happening, and frequently with some great nugget of community news. Even though he had been retired for many years, he always wanted to help our staff at the Anacortes American. His knowledge of Anacortes history and connection to the past often helped us at the newspaper provide that extra context of a story, the extra understanding of community and place. And he was no slouch at giving us occasional great tips on breaking news stories. Wallie, as many of the people here will attest, is a great people person. I'm almost convinced he knows everybody in Anacortes and half the people in the state of Washington. His ability to connect with people is astounding. And we often heard news first from Wallie because people in Anacortes both like and trust him. It has been my great fortune to count Wallie as a friend, and since I worked at the American, we've stayed in touch, enjoying many pleasant lunches and interesting conversations through the years. Wallie truly is a man for all seasons. photojournalist, journalist, newspaper publisher, supporter of the arts, historian, author, and community leader. One of his most evident traits to me is his curiosity. He's intensely interested in the world, and that is evident in his wide-ranging collection of photos. Wallie took as a photojournalist, U.S. presidents, the Beatles, Rolling Stones, scenes from travels abroad. A small sample of his photos are, as Elizabeth noted, are displayed in this exhibit. During my journalism career at both weekly and daily newspapers, I've worked with many fine journalists, including a couple of Pulitzer Prize winners. The very best journalists, such as Wallie, not only do a great job of reporting the news, but they also connect the importance of that news to the community of readers they serve. Journalism, especially photojournalism, captures images of our world and holds it up for examination, both good and bad. There are excellent photographers on this panel. Scott and Elaine, you may also be a great photographer. As my wife can tell you, I am not. I'm a terrible photographer. But I can say that Wallie clearly has the shooter's eye, looking for that right image that captured a moment in time, from the sublime to the tragic. Wallie clearly understands how important it is for people to see the world as it is. From joyous children playing on a street corner to the horrific live capture of orca whales in Penn Cove on Whidbey Island in 1970. Wallie's strongest journalistic impulses, in my opinion, stem from the communities with his deepest roots, Anacortes and Fidalgo Island and Whidbey Island. Wallie's leadership of the Anacortes American and Whidbey News-Times newspapers had the benefit of enriching those communities. Weekly newspapers are the lifeblood of journalism. Real community journalism, as Wallie practiced, involves someone leading the community dialogue, even when that leadership is misinterpreted or disliked. A strong weekly newspaper both extols and scolds. The excellence of Wallie's legacy continues today with those same newspapers, helped along by succeeding excellent publishers and journalists. When working at the Anacortes American, it was clear to me that the community relied on the newspaper, sometimes was aggravated, and sometimes downright ticked off by some of our stories. But the Anacortes community always respected the kind of journalism being practiced, and we have Wallie to thank for that. Through the years, I've delighted in seeing Wallie's collections of photographs get organized into books, including the ones we've mentioned. Wallie both captured living history as a journalist and preserved it by collecting old and historic photos of Anacortes, Fidalgo Island, Whidbey Island, and in fact the state of Washington and Pacific Northwest. I think we all owe a debt of gratitude to Wallie for his passion to preserve, and to the Center for Pacific Northwest Studies, Anacortes Museum, and other museums for protecting and preserving for future generations. So thank you very much for having me on the panel. It's an honor to be Wallie's friend and to speak briefly about him.
Are you looking at me, Paul?
I am, Scott.
Okay, I also prepared things to read because I'm not very good off the cuff, but I just do want to say that, you know, this is an academic presentation, but there is a lot of love in the room here for that man right there and the things that he's done. There's an anecdote in a story that about Wallie Funk that appeared in the Skagit Valley Herald. It was written by one of our reporters who doesn't work there now, Marta Mervosh. And we had the pleasure of going over and visiting with Wallie for a couple hours, and the time flew by because he regaled us with all sorts of wonderful stories, and we got a chance to see his basement, which had all sorts of really cool stuff from his days at the Whidbey News-Times and cartoons and what have you. But in 1941, wow, Wallie had graduated from high school, and he was working. What was it, intern at the Mercury?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Because
it printed. Yeah. And so Wallie's first experience with photojournalism as it came out was him hearing a fire whistle and stepping outside to see a big column of smoke billowing from the sky. And so he grabbed his camera and ran to the scene and got a photograph of the Anacortes Lumber and Box Company mill burning up. Well, that appeared in that afternoon's paper. No, Wally was, 4 blocks from the scene, and he ran there on foot.
Yeah.
And that is one of the several photos that are in, I believe, your collection at the Anacortes Museum. Wally is synonymous with community journalism, and the papers he ran in Anacortes and Whidbey Island contained photographs that recorded the day-to-day lives of people in his coverage area, but Wally also took community journalism to a new level. He brought his readers close to the superstars like the Beatles and Jimmy Carter and the Rolling Stones. And it was funny because I was rummaging through, I have a dresser drawer full of important papers that I can never find. And I was looking for the title of this car I was going to sell. And I came across this magazine that I'd grabbed and stashed. And Wally's on the cover, Anacortes magazine. It was their second issue. And there's a story written by Steve Berenson about Wally's trip to go photograph the Beatles when they came to Seattle in 1966. And so I kind of cribbed some of Steve's article for this. It was in the article was written in August 2012, but the Beatles came in the August of 1966, and by that time they were huge. And Wally decided, being the publisher of the Whidbey News-Times, that he would go see them. And so there was a story about you pulling over and listening to Eleanor Rigby for the first time, and that clicked with the man. And so Wally got the press pass, and you could see the photographs from the Beatles concert that he took. But the cool thing is after the press conference, he walked into the concert area, and he was stuck right against the front of the stage. And so here he is, he's jammed against the front of the stage. The Beatles are starting to perform, and Wally just breaks out his camera and got the photograph of John Lennon and Paul McCartney singing. And I guess he blasted off about 20 frames from his 35 millimeter film camera, and then a police security guy stopped him. Because apparently there were no photos to be taken by the press of the concert. But he's a photojournalist, so what are you going to do, right? So anyway, afterwards, I guess Wally published a full broadsheet of the photos from the concert, and I guess there was a little blowback at the time because you can imagine the frame of mind of many of the people that lived on Whidbey Island, being a Navy town and everything, and the Beatles were this counterculture, long hair and peace, love, dove, and all that type of thing. So you took some grief, but you also got a lot of community support from the young folks.
Tremendous.
Yeah.
Honest.
Yeah. And so, he served his community in a similar manner throughout his career as a news photographer. And the dramatic capturing of the orca whales in Penn Cove is an example of how even a community journalist can bring an important issue to the fore. And this was the capturing of the orcas was conducted by a group that wanted to sell some of them to the aquariums around the world. And so they rounded up 80 whales in Little Penn Cove after apparently they chased them underneath the Deception Pass Bridge, and that's where they ended up. And so I guess there was like 7 of them that were sold to marine parks, according to an article, several articles that I read on this. But 5 of them, including 4 babies, died. And so here you are. It just wasn't a simple gathering of wildlife and hauling them away. It was a tragedy. And so Wally was there to cover this. Wally's photojournalism career spanned 6 decades. and he used his position to spearhead and establish museums in Anacortes and LaConner, McIntyre Hall and Mount Vernon. And, so he's like the embodiment of community journalism. As co-owner of the American, and when the city was suffering economically, and this is from Marta's article again, Wallie advocated through the newspaper for better schools, public facilities, and paving the streets, and he took a lot of grief from some of the people in town that didn't want the higher taxes. But that was the job of a so-called small-town journalist at the time. But of all the politics and advocacy, for me, the photographs Wallie took stand as a visual testament to a man who's dedicated to telling a story. And he heard the true calling of what it means to serve by connecting his readers to the events of his time. He recorded big events on film and delivered them personally to his readers. Thank you.
I did a printout also and then left it on my desk, so thank goodness for technology. Some people who don't know any better might try to classify Wallie Funk as a big fish in a small pond, but the truth is that he would have been a big fish in any pond, and we are really lucky that he chose to stay in the waters of his home, in his homeland. It's hard to overstate the impact he's had on his communities. Anacortes and Whidbey Island have museums and community theaters. The Museum of Northwest Art is here largely because of Wallie's efforts. He was born to be a journalist. He started collecting stories when he was a young boy in the 1920s and 30s. He was delighted in the tales of Anacortes that were spun by Anacortes pioneers, such as his grandparents and the other old-timers up and down their block. He wasn't shy about knocking on doors and talking to people. And he also enjoyed the photos that brought these stories fully to life. And meanwhile, precocious lad that he was, he had a babysitter type up the stories for him when he was, 7 or 8? And although he did love photographs at that stage, he wasn't in love with photography. He told me he had zero interest in dragging around one of those gigantic cameras that photojournalists had to use in those days, and he intentionally avoided taking any photojournalism classes at UW. But all that changed in a flash when he got his hands on his Leica camera. And the camera gave him the freedom he needed to capture the world. In 1950, Wallie and his business partner, John Weber, bought the Anacortes American. In their first edition, Wallie wrote a front-page editorial asking his neighbors to help save the community's history by bringing their old photos to the newspaper office to be copied. People brought in hundreds of them, including key images, irreplaceable images of the first years of the city. A couple years later, Wallie saw some men loading up a truck with photos and negatives from photographer Ferd Brady, who'd had a photo studio in Anacortes for 30 years. And he paid them $25 to take the treasure trove to his house instead of to the dump. Ferd Brady had a photojournalist streak in him also that sent him out to capture people, places, and events such as the opening of the first airport in Anacortes in 1928. So these were irreplaceable, as I said. In the late 50s, Wallie spent his own money to have prints from this photo collection he'd gathered enlarged and matted for an exhibit. The results thrilled the community and led to the establishment of the Anacortes Museum. And over the years, he also amassed thousands of negatives that were taken by him and other staff photographers at the Anacortes American. They depict every aspect of life at that time and place, including the arrival of Shell Oil, the visits of dignitaries such as Congressman Gerald Ford and Senator Scoop Jackson. But many of the best images simply catch the innocent wonder of the time, like boys playing with marbles, girls with their Christmas dolls, personal favorite. There's a dog sitting with a tangle of bikes around him, and he's just waiting for the kids to come out of the movie theater. These truly capture a lost time and place. The photos taken or collected by Wallie now make up the core of the Anacortes Museum's collection. Without his enthusiastic support, there would be no museum, or at least nothing of this caliber. Wallie didn't just observe his communities, he was an active participant in clubs, committees, and any efforts that strove for civic improvement. He documented things that needed attention, such as muddy unpaved streets, flooded storm drains, and he wrote editorials and articles. Wallie didn't really see that there was any difference between the two, to convince the community to find solutions. During his 14 years at the American, the city underwent one of its finest eras of civic improvement. The changes were so remarkable that the city won the designation of All-America City. And by the way, Wallie nominated the city, filled out all the paperwork for the application, and then gave the presentation, the winning presentation, to the jury in Miami. He was similarly involved during his years at the Whidbey News-Times, sometimes with national implications. His photos of the Penn Cove Orca Roundup shocked the world in the same way as photos of drowned refugee children have shocked us in recent times. His impact on the world didn't end when he retired. First, he began typing stories about Anacortes history on his old manual typewriter. He wrote about 2 articles a month from 1994 to 2001, which were published in the Anacortes, eventually completing more than 175. And we pulled out some of the best for the book that Elizabeth mentioned, Pictures of the Past. And of course, the book is illustrated with photos from the Wallie Funk collection. And it was the bestseller in 2015 at Watermark Book Company in Anacortes. We've almost sold all of the 1,000 that we printed. Proceeds of the book will help fund future museum publications and help preserve Wallie's photo collection. A few years ago, Wallie decided he liked the program at Skagit Valley College's new Marine Skills Center so much that he began making phone calls and twisting arms in his uniquely endearing way, until he raised more than $100,000 for scholarships for the program. And working with Wallie, and I helped to typeset some of his columns at the American before I worked on his book. It's been a highlight of my career. Generous with praise, he always has gone out of his way to encourage budding journalists and museum curators. He worked with high school journalism classes for many years and printed their newspapers. Many cub reporters that he hired straight out of school have gone on to significant careers inspired by his impeccable example. Over the years, I've encountered dozens successful writers who called or stopped by and said, "Wallie Funk gave me my first job." And others, such as Jack Darton, who recently retired as publisher of the Anacortes American, followed Wallie's example by donating a large collection of photos and negatives to the Anacortes Museum. Wallie continues to be a mentor, and we all strive to continue to deserve his praise. And with an impact like this, his legacy can't help but endure.
I had the great pleasure of getting to know Wallie from the ground up. I first met him in the mid-1990s. I was working for Eby's Landing National Reserve, running their oral history program, and someone asked if I would curate this guy's collection who just brought boxes of photos into the Island County Museum. And that was Wallie. And I started looking through what he had brought, and the breadth and depth of what he had was so astounding that it was sort of mind-boggling. Like, it wasn't just photos about one thing, it was photos about any possible topic on the planet you could think of. And because the Island County Museum at that point in time did not have the resources to handle a collection of that size, that went on hold. And 5 years later, I was working for the Anacortes Museum, and I was approached by their foundation, and they asked if I would take on the job of doing his collection. And it was one of the few things in my life I ever did without sort of like investigating it thoroughly. And I'll never forget when I first walked into his office, I remember thinking, I should have come here first and looked at this, because it was the sum total of his photo collection and everything else he had saved except for what he had at home, which was a whole nother story altogether. But it was thousands of images. I remember I had asked the Anacortes Museum when they asked me to take on the job how many pictures we were talking about. And they said, 10 to 15,000, maybe. And at the end of the project, which took 4 years, I worked with Wally on this job. It was over 100,000 images. 100,000 images. Many of those were just negatives that were unidentified, that was just hours of holding him up to the light and then trying to match him with his old copies of his newspaper articles to see what the thing was. It was an interesting 4 years, and what I treasure more than anything for the opportunity is I got to work with Wally in his office on a regular basis, and we were on the nitty-gritty level of these photos. Yeah, they were cool historic photos, and everybody sees them and goes, "Wow, that's really neat." But to hear Wally's memories of when he took the picture, why he took the picture, how hard it was to take a picture in the era before digital photos. He said, it's so easy now. And back then it was very hard. You had to get the light right and the exposure and all of that. So that was one aspect to learning about his photo collection and his work that was really compelling to me. But the other was taking his oral histories and hearing his stories from early childhood when he was the son of very prosperous business owners in Anacortes that lost most everything in the Depression. Suddenly they're moving out to this sort of ramshackle house on Lake Campbell. And instead of going to the nice brick school in Anacortes, he's going to a one-room schoolhouse in Dewey with a bunch of farm kids, all of whom were bigger than he was, much bigger. They were better at sports than he was. But what Wally found out when he was in 9th grade, he went to a football game up here in Bellingham, where in the last 3 minutes of the game, Anacortes kicked a field goal and won the game. And Wally was so taken aback and astounded by it. He first of all went down to the football field and tore off a piece of the goalpost to take home with him. And then he went to his father's hotel that night and typed up a story on the typewriter, framed the story, framed the scrap of the goalpost, published the story was published in the high school newspaper, and he got the sense of fulfillment and connection that I think he'd been looking for a long time, because he suddenly said, "I found out that I mattered, and I mattered because I was able to tell this story." And that was he went on to tell many, many, many stories and take many, many, many photographs. But what impresses me about him is they're tied to everyday life and everyday individuals who struggle to get by on a regular basis. And as everybody here has said, he was not shy at the newspaper about calling people up and saying, "We need money for this cause. We need you to get out and vote." He had a woman in the 1950s share a book with him called Democracy is You. Democracy is you. It's each and every one of us. And it compelled him to do work in his life that brought good things to everyday people that hate taxes, people that hate the government. He helped make communities function in a way that made life better for everybody. And he went on from Anacortes to do that. He went to Whidbey Island, as you've heard, where he started the Whidbey News Playhouse. He was a secretary for the Navy organization. He documented what was going on at the Whidbey Naval Air Base all through the Vietnam era. Think of what that must have been like, going out there and taking photos of these troops coming home, troops leaving, protesters protesting. He was there on the front line of all of that. Despite the fact that when he was at the University of Washington going to journalism school, he actually had to take a photography class, which he hated. And he had to take a print processes class, which he hated. So what did he do when he graduated? He went to Europe for 7 months, bought his first camera, a Seriflex, took all these amazing photos, came back and found out his hometown paper was for sale, plopped down $10 in earnest money, went out to borrow the rest from family and friends, including the obstetrician that delivered him, and then ran this newspaper. And in the third issue, he's out there saying, "We need a new fire station. Get out there and vote. We need to preserve our history. Save it. Bring it in. Share it." it's amazing. I've worked on many historical projects in Skagit and Island County, and his work informs just about every level of the work that I've done, from the Swinomish tribe, where I work today, to just trying to raise enough money to build the performance hall at Skagit Valley College. He served on the Washington State Art Commission for years. He was the president of the Washington Newspaper Publishers Association. He was on the first Washington State trade delegations to go to China, not long after Nixon did. So he's got a broad, wide-ranging interest in the world that he has happily and generously shared with all of us for many, many years. And it's a real honor to be here as part of this panel.
We're going to move into now a general discussion on Wallie and photojournalism and community journalism, as Wallie is so articulately described. This is a tough question for everybody here. And you've seen so many of his photos, and you guys are real. I mean, I really value these two panelists, as photojournalists. They're terrific photographers. What would be some of your favorite Wallie photos?
Boy, there's so many.
Or you quit.
Well, as you know, he not only collected photos from people who had old images and then saved actual photographic collections of other photographers. He took thousands of his own images. And I think the ones that I liked best about the ones that he took himself were the simple everyday moments of life. I mean, the fires were cool. There was actually an undertaker parlor that burned down in Anacortes one time. So he crawls into the building while it's on fire. He's got pictures of caskets and flames and stuff like that. And I was like, Wallie, why did you do that? And he goes, well, because it was on fire. But I like the simple photos of the kids on the street. Those are all my brother and me, by the way. I know. The ones of you guys.
If there was a hole in the evening edition, we filled it.
That's right. He'd haul them down to an abandoned house on the Skagit Flats in Halloween costumes and get them up in this house where everything was, kind of falling down, and just photograph them till the cows came home, and they were these great pictures in the papers. So I really value those because it shows the everyday connection to just what we all do each day. Those are mine.
That's great.
Yep.
What about y'all?
I was going to say something very similar. It's the everyday pictures, the children at play, the life as it doesn't exist anymore. It's a wonderful record.
Scott?
Well, the ones from the community are great, but I just love the audacity of Wallie to say, I'm going to bring the world to my town, and that's what you did. You went out and photographed the presidents, and you went out and photographed the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. I mean, they didn't come to Coopville and they didn't come to Oak Harbor. But you brought them home, and so the world itself is a community. And so when you say community journalism, you might think about the mom and pop type stuff that's right down the street. But we're all connected, and you kind of elevated that connection by bringing the hometown photos from afar back to the hometown. The people in the communities that the smaller papers cover really do care. And, you're a good example of that. I mean, my favorite phone calls are the ones from you. If I had a photo in the paper that Wallie liked, he'd call me up and just sing my praises and made my, like the ego just got totally inflated, and then I had to go to work and all that stuff. So. But, the people that read their papers really do care. And there's nothing better than hearing from a reader that says, hey, thanks for putting that in. It makes it worthwhile. You got to have some sort of benefit. We're not going to get rich in this profession, that's for sure. But, we get rich in other ways.
Readers weren't always saying thanks.
Oh, but, that's the cool thing, though, is that, even though readers, get ticked off, that means you matter. And so I guess that's cool in a way. You know, you don't want them to shoot you or anything or be violent, but
One of the prouder moments I had because I followed my father into journalism. We came home one Christmas and he had gotten, at age 77, a hate letter. Dad, you're still turning stuff out where you can get people's attention. Because, yes, and I know who wrote it.
he probably did. Probably knew the handwriting.
Just a little follow-up question on this. Wally's curiosity is evident in his photography. Besides curiosity, what makes great photojournalism?
Patience is a big one. You don't just show up at an event, snap 3 pictures and leave. You watch for the moment, you watch for the person, you change the angles. You have to work it. Wally worked it. That's a big one. Making people feel at ease is another one, so they forget that the camera is there. Not that easy, is it? Do you have anything else? Go ahead.
That's what you learn to do if you're trying to get inside somebody's home or somebody's mind or whatever. Is you have to let them know that you're interested in what they're interested in, and you want to tell their story. Yeah, I mean, it takes a special person to do that, Wally, and you did it really well.
I think another really key thing about Wally is he paid attention, he noticed, he was aware, he had his eyes open. And I think one thing that really drove him about Anacortes was he saw the changes in his town, the changes as it was transformed from a working class sort of industrial-based town to one that has become fairly gentrified. If you haven't been to Anacortes in the last few years, he noticed the changes, and he wanted to make people aware of what was being lost as things were being demolished or torn down or replaced and not talked about. And so that's another key component of his photos, is just the details and paying attention and trying to convey that to people so that people are aware.
Okay, thank you. Some of Wally's most important photos concern the highly controversial 1970 live orca capture in Penn Cove on Whidbey Island. Outrage over the death of orcas during the capture led to the banning of live whale capture in the waters of Washington State. My question is, how can photojournalism bring about societal change, and even should it? Ralph Monroe, who some of you may know, he's a Western alum. He was the longtime Secretary of State, and until recently a Western trustee. I don't know how I mentioned that I knew Wally. He goes, "Oh, I know Wally. I've known Wally for years." He helped with the orca situation, which that's where the societal change comes in, where you can change what you see that is something wrong with your society. That gives you the power.
If I could make a comment.
No, sure, please.
One thing with all the younger people in here today, there is such a technology jump from back then, my childhood, and the instruments that were being used to now that boggles the mind. It's hard. But one thing I wanted to say about my dad, the writer used to write on an old Royal manual typewriter. And if you've ever even seen a typewriter in a movie anymore, I go, "Whoa, a typewriter!" You know, these were hard to push down. And he didn't even want to make the transition to electric typewriter. But one day he came home and his arm was in a sling, and he had his fingertip cut off in a door sling. And that's the most pain I have ever seen you in that night, that you were in total pain. But now imagine how that changes then. Here's a guy that typed on a very difficult to type, but for you, it was your axe, you know. You knew how to do it, but it changed everything about how he had to learn to type all over again, because he didn't have that fingertip anymore. But I bring that up only as an example of his perseverance, because I never heard him complain too much about it, but also about what would be considered Stone Age tools that we use. My brother always joked, well, software to dad is typewriter ribbon. That was true. But that was a long time ago in the world of tech. So now in photojournalism, as you say, you've got a picture of a baby washed up on a shore. It changes everything as far as the story of the immigrants going here. But the tools, the changing, it boggles me. I'm 58. My dad is 93, close to 94 now. But I've seen such an arc of where the technology is going that it's breathtaking.
Well, with that technology, where is photojournalism going? Is it relegated to Twitter and Facebook, or is it going to continue to persist as something important?
Well, it's split in two. It's still photography and photo video now, because everybody can video the entire thing. So, and a lot of those videos, when they hit social media, they're changing everything. But a single still photo, I still believe, can change everything.
Yeah.
And it's still images.
Yeah.
And
Well, there's something to be said for there's thousands and thousands of photos on any subject that you want to look at on the websites and social media and this, that, and the other in the electronic realm. And, our newspaper is still relevant in print. And I don't know the answer to that. I do know that, we're so saturated with outrageous photos and images that it's almost got to the point, no matter how egregious the act is that they record, it's just, there's just such an overabundance of them. I think we become numb to a lot of the problems that are going on. And I don't know, maybe print is still relevant as far as something that matters, something that's, you can handle and have as part of you, as part of your daily routine. One of the things I like to do every morning is grab my 2 newspapers out of the box and drink a cup of coffee and read the damn things. I want to do that every morning. I take a good hour to do that, mainly because I don't want to go to work. But, I just want to take the time to do that. And, I guess I would advocate that anybody young in photojournalism or anybody here in this room, try that out. Try getting a real newspaper. Grab the New York Times from the freebie racks on campus and grab a cup of joe and take an hour and read it. And see if that experience isn't a little different from, walking around with the smartphone and tripping over, raised bricks and red square and reading stuff that way. See if I don't know, maybe it is different, maybe it isn't. To me, it's different. But I think it's a kind of an era, that, the newspaper era and the community journalism era that, you kind of ushered through, Wally, and then saw your work get published. I hopefully a vestige of it continues. But it sure meant a lot to the people that, were able to look at those publications and relate to what was in the newspaper.
I love finding stuff online. I love scrolling through Facebook or Yahoo or whatever. But you can get lost in it and you follow thing to thing to thing, and sometimes you don't really know what's going on. It's nice to have somebody that says, these are the most important things that happened today, and hopefully it's an ethical someone that made that decision, and if they put it in the newspaper, there's only a finite amount of space. These are the most important things that happened today. It's really helpful way to narrow it down. You can always learn more.
And I just following on that too, I just wonder what the impact of somebody like Wally, who could say, yeah, we need to pave our roads, to say something like that with impact. I mean, can that be done now? Yeah, I worked years ago at a daily newspaper in the South, and one of my colleagues was a young woman named Ann Green, and she won a Pulitzer Prize at 26. She was the editor of the Birmingham newspaper. And she did a series of stories on infant mortality, and her first line was, "Alabama's babies are dying." She caused profound change and probably saved thousands of children's lives. But is that even possible today in today's journalism? I don't know. It's an interesting question. It's so diffuse. Well, another question is, a lot of the photos Wallie took were in black and white.
'Cause I loved it.
Yeah, what's...
This was my media. I take, and you asked the question, I do take some colors now, but black and white was where I felt I excelled. And they told a story, the whales, right there. Drops of water, and the man who started, I didn't start it, but the man who started it all is in that picture. So anyway.
What do you guys think? Black and white, is it a thing of the past, or does it still have a place? Or?
Well,
I love it.
there's a couple of old-time photojournalism professors here that insist their students shoot black and white, at least for their first.
Few assignments. I don't know, one of them in this room might even require it for the entire course. I don't know. But there is something about black and white. It breaks down the essence of a photograph differently than a color photo. To me, it's more about composition and values of light and dark and content. And I think, color can itself, and there's nothing wrong with that, but color can of itself be a subject too. But, I guess if you want to get down to the basic elements in a photograph, start out with black and white. And the thing is, you can't shoot black and white. Well, you can. I guess you can set your camera for black and white, but what often happens is folks shoot color and then turn it into black and white and then look at it that way. But, look at a color photograph, and then and if you're handy with the Photoshop, shift it into black and white and see what difference is. How differently do the two mediums communicate? And I don't know. We're in a color world. I don't think we're going back, technology-wise, but there is an essence to black and white that is unique and it's sometimes preferable.
Other thoughts on that?
Well, it just makes the composition the most important element. No.
You've seen a lot of black and white photos.
Oh yeah, he had a lot of black and white photos, but and it's funny because he had a lot of color pictures too. He started shooting color in the early 1990s. When you moved back to Anacortes, you started shooting color, but I didn't find his color photos nearly as compelling as the black and whites. They were two different things to me.
There's an old saying that journalism is the first draft of history. Wallie bridged both journalism and history, took photos of his day, but also preserved many old and historic photos that allow us an important glimpse into the past. Perhaps that we can have a discussion on Wallie's interest in preserving history and why it's not only important to him, but to all of us.
I think that it was Wally's contact with people and their daily life and the world around him, and he wanted to keep a little piece of that alive, that each picture is a fraction of a second that's just frozen there for us to enjoy forever, never changing, and people without that would disappear from memory and be gone. It's a way to hold on to.
I don't want to be going. Just as, not my image, but that this was here, they were important, and the one of the volcano fell in Seattle in Oak Harbor said, "You know, I have a little plane. Would you like to take a little trip around the volcano?" Well, that was a time the volcano was hot. Oh, okay. So we flew down and flew around. There were lots of instructions about don't touch, don't get too close. But anyway, so then we decided we had enough. Are just about ready to go when it began to flumate. What does a volcano do when it blows? Anyway, And I said, you know, would you dare going back around to give me? And we did, and that was the photograph we actually, and that was the 18th of May was when the big explosion took. The other one was early April. But I'm happy with that picture too, because there was action.
The first pictures he solicited from elderly people in Anacortes in 1950, you got to realize that the town hadn't even existed 60 years before that. Not even existed. And in the short space of a time, not only was Anacortes created and scheduled to become the port of the West Coast, we were going to be the New York of the West Coast. Things have changed really fast. So you go back at his photos as a historian. I use them and say, when we're looking at environmental issues for the Swinomish tribe, for example, how land has changed, how waterways have changed, how we've changed how we use the resources around us. I find his photos an incredibly invaluable resource in that respect. And the ones that he collected on Whidbey Island and also up in Whatcom County, if you want something that tells the story of the thing you're studying in school, look at his collection. There's so much in there that can visualize the changes we're all experiencing as a society right now. And they're wonderful for that.
Anything else?
I guess within the context of the history of the world, photographs are probably about as old as this corner of the world is itself. I mean, think about, if there were photojournalists around during the age of the dinosaurs, we might have a total different representation of what those creatures were about. But think about history since photography. Think about the daguerreotypes, the tintypes from the Civil War, Matthew Brady, and how history has been recorded since photographs came into being, and it's a lot different. It's a lot more factual, thanks to the recording of life events in that one split second of a shutter. So.
Some concluding thoughts from the panelists on Wallie's influence as a photojournalist, historian, and community leader, and then we'll have open it up for some questions and answers. Any concluding thoughts?
Be interested, be involved, be generous with your time, and you will follow in the footsteps of Wallie Funk. He's a pretty amazing individual, and it's been a huge honor to be part of your life.
I'm thankful to be here on so many levels, and I'm fortunate to know you, Wallie, and I'm thankful for everything you've told me and shared, your feedback, and the memories. It's been great.
Anacortes and Whidbey Island are better places because of you, Wallie, and I'm a better person for knowing you.
As I've told my beautiful wife, who's sitting right behind Wallie, I've known a few truly exceptional people in my life. I mean, truly exceptional, and Wallie is one of them. So it's been a real honor and a pleasure to chat with you and just to hear some of your great stories. So thank you very much. This was a wonderful. Thank you, Wallie.